the greatest section. Come on, a little energy. Thank you, Monica. Do it. Come on, creative space. How amazing has this been? This has been so amazing. And we're about to see one of my personal heroes, superhero woman. She's going to show you some amazing stuff and just like, it's going to be a really amazing masterclass in just the 1 hour we have together. Please welcome to the stage the one and only Cristina Mittermeier.
Oh my God, there's still people here. Thank you for staying. I was kind of worried, that people were trickling out for lunch. So everybody, thank you. I know it's a beautiful day out there, and I really appreciate you being here. I want to take a moment to thank the people who organized this, because it is quite a special thing for those of us who've been here a couple of days. So Kayla Lindquist, Michaela Ion, Matt Burnell, Mark Weir, Chris Hudson. If you are part of the Sony team, give yourselves a hand. Amazing, thank you. Yeah, especially Michaela, thank you. I have been a Sony artisan. I think the first time, Kayla, you contacted me was 2007. So it's been a long time. And when I first got that phone call, my career was rather small. I was in the same place where so many of you are now, thinking, what am I going to do? And Sony picking me up as one of the artisans and just welcoming me into this family, giving me a voice, not just for my photography, but for the things that I care about, has made all the difference in the world in my career. So I'm very, very grateful to Sony. And I'll say this, you made it as a photographer the day that you get a phone call from one of your heroes, because he wants you to be the model. So in Mexico, we have a great tradition of filmmaking, cinematography, photography. And I got a phone call from the one and only Emmanuel El Chivo Lubeski. And I honestly couldn't believe it. And he wanted to photograph me for this calendar. And he said, we're going to do this in Miami. And I said, Chivo, come on, we're Mexican. So we ended up doing this enormous production in Mexico. But I'm so proud, because I wanted to pay tribute to the small fishermen of Mexico, and I think Chivo did such a good job. Anyway, the Art of Enoughness, that's what we're going to talk about today. Stories are so important to humanity. They really are a very powerful force for human beings. They are the glue that keeps us together, because we are a very fractious society. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to the midterms, but we all have very big opinions, ideologies, to the point that we barely talk to each other anymore. And story, beyond kinship, is the thing that glues us together. It really is the thing that holds the center when everything else falls apart. So storytelling is pretty important, and I know that all of you are storytellers, so no better audience to share a message with you guys. And the human heart is like a vast sea of emotion. We are emotional beings. And just like a sea needs a shore to bump against, stories need something to bump against. In my own photography, for me, that thing is empathy. I want my photographs to build bridges of empathy and compassion, not just for each other, but for the creatures that share the planet with us. It's so important that we don't just see them as a resource that needs to be extracted, but as fellow passengers on spaceship Earth. And all of this began for me because I grew up in Mexico. I'm a middle-class kid, 5 children. My parents were professionals, but they had zero sense of adventure. My mom is a psychologist, my dad is an accountant. I had these dreams, I would read National Geographic and Jacques Cousteau, and I dreamt of dolphins and whales, and this is the closest I ever got. Pablo, you know where that is? That's Lake Xochimilco, which is one of the most polluted lakes in the world. And I remember this day, looking over the edge of the boat, hoping to see manatees. Anyway, this is as close as I ever got, which is pretty funny. But I was really, really lucky, because early in my career, I came upon a very important concept that really has become my North Star, and I wanted to share that with you today. It's called the purpose of your life. It's a Japanese concept, and I know we have a lot of Japanese colleagues here today. It's a word called ikigai. My husband laughs because he says it's not like ikigai, right? It's ikigai. And it's the confluence of 4 things. And if you're lucky enough to find these 4 things in your life, it'll change forever. So those things are the thing that you love, which is also the thing that you're good at. Very importantly, it's the thing that gets you paid. And quite importantly, I mean, at least for me, very important, is the thing that the world needs. And when these four things come together for you, you don't get up to do a hustle, to work on a gig. You get up to fulfill the purpose of your life. And it is incredibly rewarding, because photography, it's a long journey, and it's a tedious one. And we hustle hard to make ends meet. So if you don't have that sense of purpose to fulfill your mission, your passion, your vocation, and your profession, it's very easy to drop out of this career. It's just, it's lonely, it's oftentimes difficult to do the hustle, right? So I was very, very lucky. I thought in the beginning that I wanted to be a wildlife photographer because that's the thing that I love. But I don't know, Melissa, Gru, are you here? She left. Oh, you're there. I realized, Melissa, that animals don't want to take their picture. They don't want to be photographed. Do we have audio? No. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to be friends with them. And for the photographers, you see, but isn't it, Melissa, to make our subjects be the celebrated creatures that they are? Because we forget that we are not alone on this planet. We share planet Earth with millions of other species that are the building blocks of life on Earth. And when they go extinct, the very life of humanity is endangered. And I don't know if you guys have been following, in the next couple of weeks, we have the Conference of the Parties for the Biodiversity Convention, and the report just came out. Since 1970, we have lost 69% of all species on Earth. So we are in a serious trouble. We need to look at animals and celebrate them as our fellow passengers. And if you were paying attention, you might be wondering why I was going around with a fisheye lens, which is usually for underwater, and this is why. It happened the day before. I know. So all I did is I put everything in a box and I sent it back to Mark Weir with a little note that said, it just needs cleaning. Thanks for the loan. Anyway, I really wanted to be a wildlife photographer, and it was not to be in the cards for many, many years. Selfishly, and I heard you say this yesterday, Melissa, I just love animals. And I love the sense of solitude, and there's a kinship when you spend the time and you gain the trust of creatures that all of a sudden come close to you to investigate you. And it's never fun to be a photographer chasing an animal like that crab. It's way more fun when an animal allows you into their world. And for me, I will never be as good as you are, Melissa, but the reason for being a wildlife photographer is just to spend time with the creatures that share the planet with us. Take, for example, the sea turtle. I found this loggerhead turtle while we were filming blue whales off the coast of Portugal in the Azores. This is the North Atlantic and the water is very cold. So I'm wearing a 10mm wetsuit when all of a sudden I see this thing floating around. And I thought, I'll get in the water and see if she lets me get close. And I did, I swam towards her and I was surprised that she had this little fish swimming with her. I took a picture of its tag. This turtle was born in West Palm Beach, Florida. And when it was a baby, it probably caught a ride on the Gulf Stream, and for 4,000 miles, it drifted on the ocean all the way to the Azores, probably just basking in the sun, munching jellyfish. 20, 30 years later, one good day, it'll make a U-turn. Something will click in her, and she will swim 4,000 miles back to the very beach where she was born, to lay her eggs. The one time in her life that she will come on land. How does she know where to go? These animals are following invisible maps that they are the only ones that can see. We know nothing about our planet. Who's following the story of Elon Musk today? Well, Twitter, right? I had dinner with this guy once, and he's really weird. And all he talked about was the fact that we're going to Mars. And I was like kind of hoping that he was going to offer me a ticket to go with. But he didn't. Does anybody have a ticket to go to Mars with Elon? Nah, we're not going, right? But if we were going with Elon to Mars, we would be boarding his spaceship. And we would get an incredible briefing on how this machine works. Because it's going to carry us through space to another planet. So we would know where the water comes from, how do we deal with our waste, and maybe we shouldn't be cutting down every tree. We might need them later. And yet here we are. This is our spaceship, and we know nothing about it. So far we have been passengers on Spaceship Earth. And it is time that we graduate to piloting this machine because it's in trouble. And it needs all of us, you know, and storytellers, we have such an important role to play in explaining to our fellow humans how our spaceship works. So the beginning of my career was not to be a wildlife photographer, sadly. Instead, I went down a rabbit hole that led me to 20 years of photographing indigenous people on this planet. And it was an amazing career because one of the great pleasures of traveling is to spend time with people that still remember the old ways. People that still know how to scratch a living from Mother Earth. And there's about 400 million indigenous people on planet Earth today. They belong to about 5,000 different tribes, and they're the largest minority on planet Earth. Whether it's a young shepherd in the highlands of Peru, Quechua people that still believe that the Pachamama, the Mother Earth, will take care of you if you take care of her. Or whether it's an Inuit hunter in northern Greenland. This is very close to a village called Kanak. Ira, are you here? We were just talking about Ira. If you get a chance to talk to Ira, the legendary National Geographic photographer, he was telling me about his several-month trip to reach the North Pole. Well, this Ira was Kanak, the northernmost human settlement in the world, and it was very cold, especially for a Mexican girl. But who here was born in 1960, 1970? Well, when we were born, there were about 6,000 languages spoken on planet Earth. And a language is not just a grammatical set of rules, it's not just a collection of vocabulary, it is a window into the human spirit. And understanding how cultures that have lived in the same place and understand the land and the wildlife and the seasons and have language to describe this is so important. So, for example, the Manukyan here near Kanak as well, they have 100 different ways of describing snow and ice. This is the first snow of spring. It's called Kanik. And in northern British Columbia, the First Nations people, the Namgis or the Tla'amin people, they have 40 different words to describe the tide. And the problem that we have is that today, less than half of those 6,000 languages are being whispered into the ears of children. So we're losing them. Every 2 weeks, you can imagine how alone this must feel. The last speaker of a language passes away, and with him or her, a whole window into the human spirit. So indigenous people like these Enga people in the highlands of New Guinea make up only 6% of global population, but they hold 90% of our cultural diversity. And even though they live in less than 20% of the land surface of the planet, they are the stewards of 80% of our biodiversity. It was not so long ago, that people of every race and in many, many tribes would sit around campfires. And we would pray to the spirits of the sky and the earth and to the mysticism of the moon so that we could get along, so that we wouldn't kill each other. And we hovered in the circle of community. And we see how tribal we're becoming today, how we become enemies of each other on our ideology. And humans cannot survive that way. So we need to build those bridges of empathy to extend an olive branch to each other. Indigenous people, they're in a lot of trouble. They have endured the horrors of colonization, residential schools. I don't know if you are from Canada, you're following all the dead bodies of young children that have been found in residential schools. They were forbidden from speaking their language or exercising their traditions for many, many years. And today, here in the United States, indigenous people suffer twice the rate of aggravated assault than any other race or community. So we have an epidemic of depression and suicide, and these are the people who are the last owners of the operating system on planet Earth. We need them, and so we need to be more empathetic and compassionate towards them. So in all these years of photographing Indigenous people, I have learned how to work with them, to use my photography to return the power of their traditions. Nothing like giving a photograph to somebody who hasn't worn the family costume or the traditional garb, and all of a sudden they see themselves like, this is Will George, he's from Slate-Watooth First Nation, and he works at the Home Depot. You know, most days he just looks like us, but he has warriored up against the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And he's built a beautiful canoe, and he is paddling on Burrard Inlet, which is now Vancouver, protesting that this pipeline is going to go right through his ancestral territory. And he's gone to jail, and he's been to court, and with my photography, my fine art, I help him pay for his legal fees. And you can find him, and he's Will George 36 on Instagram, and he's a pretty cool dude. He literally hung himself from the Lions Bridge in Vancouver, you know, with a line, and he was there all day interrupting traffic, like a real protester. Anyway, despite all the horrors that Indigenous people have survived, there's an underlying sense of fulfillment and contentment when you visit one of these villages. And I could not put my finger on what it was. Like, we don't have a word in English for what it's like to live in community, to be proud of your language, of your culture, of your rituals, to know how the land that you live on works. So I call it enoughness. You know, it's a sense of living with the land, of being part of a larger ecosystem. And this concept of enoughness has become really important because we live in a planet with limited resources. And I'm not an economist, but I know that the economy that we live in today works on a supply and demand market theory, right? Surprisingly, it was built in the 1930s. Like, we have nothing else that's from the 1930s except our economic theory that says that the markets need to grow infinitely every year. The economy has to grow. Every year. We hear it on the news all the time. The economy has to grow. But we live in a planet of finite resources. And in nature, anything that grows exponentially is called a cancer. And it's not so good. So I've been thinking, how do you redefine an economy? Here we are, all of humanity. There's 8 billion of us. In the next 30 years, there's going to be another 2 billion people joining us. And we have to share the limited resources of Earth with all of the biodiversity that shares the planet with us. And there's 2 boundaries to this. The bottom boundary, I call the social foundation. Whoever falls beneath that social foundation, and so many of us are falling beneath this now, is probably not able to afford housing, or water, or food, or health, and I find that unacceptable. Humanity has been left behind by the economic theory that we live under today. The other boundary, it's the ecological ceiling. It's how much our planet can support. And when you overshoot the ecological ceiling, you find yourself with a hole in the ozone layer, or acidification, or forest fires, or deforestation. So humanity needs to learn to live between these 2 boundaries and to develop this sense of enoughness. Good news is that we are in a period of time where we're transitioning from an economy of extraction to one of regeneration. And we see it everywhere, people talking about a circular economy. We're seeing a transition to different energies, and it is messy. It's not perfect. It's going to take us some time. But we need to subscribe to this idea that unless we change our ways, we're not going to make it. So here's what I love about enoughness. It's a 2-part journey. The first part of the journey is deeply personal. Only you can go on this journey. And it's a journey that says, I declare myself part of this ecosystem. I want to reorient myself to live within the boundaries of Earth, because I am a citizen of this planet. Once you do that, then it becomes so easy to reorient your resources, your philosophy, your influence, your friendships, the way you educate your children towards living in a sense of enoughness. And it really becomes so simple to say, you know what, maybe I don't need 40 pairs of shoes. Or maybe I don't need a bigger car. Maybe I don't care if my neighbor has a bigger house. How much do I need? When is enough for me so that I can feel like I'm enough? In Indigenous communities, it's a really beautiful thing, because the wealthiest person in the community is not the one that has the most, the one that has hoarded money or wealth or resources. It's the person that gives back the most. I find that beautiful. And for indigenous people, it doesn't matter where in the world you go, they all abide by the same principle. Take only what you need and use everything you take. And if you do that, enoughness becomes pretty simple. When indigenous people ask us to rethink our economic system so that they become more sustainable, they're not asking us to be communists. They're asking that the wealth of a nation is measured by the health of the air and the water and the soil. That success is not measured by how much money you have, or how many clients you have, or how big is your bank account, but by the strength of our relationships and how much time do we have to nurture them. And finally, the strength of a nation should not be measured by how big our military is, but are we all thriving in this nation, or just a handful? So I think it's really important to rethink these things. We have been indoctrinated and marketed a way of thinking that's killing us. This is my friend Ruben George. He is the Sundance chief of the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. And he told me that in his belief system, there's no difference between how a human is made, an animal is made, the mountain is made, the raven, the river, the rock, the salmon, they're all made of the same matter as the ancestors. And when he said this to me, I remembered my biology class, that reminded me that everything that's alive today, including us, or that has ever lived on this planet is made of carbon. We are a carbon-based planet. And today we have a carbon problem. I was talking to a friend of mine, an economist, Dr. Raf Shami, and he was saying to me, we have a problem with excess carbon on planet Earth. And if you think about it as a bucket full of carbon, we have to do two things. The first thing is we have to turn off the tap. And 90% of the conversation is, how do we lower emissions? And people are thinking about electric vehicles and alternative energy. But the other problem is, how do you drain the top? All the carbon that's already there. And that's where the ocean comes in. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to do work for ocean conservation. I really have been privileged for the vast majority of my life, especially my life as a professional photographer, to have spent it underwater. I feel like I've been witness to the most spectacular show on Earth, and that is our planet's ocean. I often think that if a spaceship came from Earth and just hovered above our atmosphere, they would look down at planet Earth and they would say, yeah, this is an ocean planet, and these are all ocean creatures. The thing is, we're very arrogant. We're terrestrial, and so we think that we live on Earth, but we really live on an ocean. And the ocean is such an important ecosystem for us. So in 2014, my partner, Paul Nicklin, and I were working for National Geographic. And we were shooting stories for the magazine that put us in the front lines of ocean conservation. So we were witnessing what happens when you experience a heat wave in the ocean and you get a mass mortality of whales or sea lions. And we were experiencing what it feels like when the ocean loses all its oxygen and all the creatures suffocate. And I remember Paul, he's done 22 stories for National Geographic, pinnacle of his career, he's a legend. He said to me, we can't do this anymore. We can't just be working to do stories for a magazine. So we left. We left with no salary, no idea of how we were going to make ends meet, and we started a non-profit organization called Sea Legacy. And all we had was our talent as storytellers and communicators. And we wanted Sea Legacy to become the marketing, communications, and education agency to speak on behalf of the ocean and all the creatures in it. But what we discovered is that in the United States alone, there's 5,000 conservation groups dedicated to the ocean alone, and none of them have a budget for communications. So Sea Legacy has become an extension of so many other organizations. And we try to do the storytelling. We try to tell the story of the challenges, the successes, and why the ocean is so important. Audio, please. And about a year after we started posting, one day I hear a knock on the door of my house. When I go to the door, it's Andy Mann. You know, and I've met him at National Geographic before, and he just kind of barges in and he says, I have to be part of what you're doing. You know, I don't have any money to pay you. And he's like, I don't care. I need to do this for my children. So Andy became our co-founder of Sea Legacy, and he is one of the many talented filmmakers that contributes to the work that we do. So what happened was the following. Started posting National Geographic, Sea Legacy, Paul, me, Andy, and we started getting a lot of followers. And it went from 1,000 to 100,000 to 1 million to a lot of people. And you remember that scene in Forrest Gump when he starts running and he looks back and there's so many people following him? That's kind of what it felt like. So we opened a gallery here in New York, I think it was 2017. And the night that it opened, it was the first time that there were Instagram stories. And so Paul grabbed his iPhone, you know, and he did oh, come on down to the gallery. And 3,000 people showed up. It was incredible, you know, like wrapped around the building, and it was raining outside and we had to get a bouncer. And those people were not coming to buy art. They were coming to hear that there is hope for our planet. And they wanted to talk to us about what they could do to help protect the planet Earth. It was, to me, it was the first time I had met our followers in person. And I knew that these were real people who cared just as much as we did. So why the ocean? The ocean, like I said, is 70% of our planet. It's the largest and the most important ecosystem on planet Earth. We feel very separate and alien from the ocean, but 50% of the air that we breathe comes from the sea. So if we were to take a breath, let's do this, come on. Let's take another one. That second breath came to you courtesy of the ocean. And let me tell you how it does it. It not only absorbs at least 25% of all the carbon in the atmosphere, it absorbs over 50% of the excess heat in the atmosphere. It is food and sustenance for 3.5 billion people. Some of the poorest people on Earth depend on the ocean for their daily livelihood. And a full 1 billion of those depend on living coral reefs for their livelihoods. And coral reefs, we've already lost 50%. They're in tremendous decline. So when you meet somebody like Tituan Vernicot, he's the founder of the Coral Gardeners. At 15 years old, he went for a snorkel and he realized his home reef was dying. He asked the grown-ups, what are you guys doing about this? And nobody was doing anything. So he started a non-profit organization called the Coral Gardeners. He Googled how to restore the coral reef. He enlisted all of his classmates in high school, and they started rebuilding the coral reefs in Morea. So when I met him a couple of years ago, I said, Tituan, what can I do for you? And he said to me, I want to be National Geographic. And so I photographed him, literally spent one afternoon with him. And the magazine saw the pictures and they loved them and they published them. And today, Tituan runs an organization that's a $10 million organization. He's syndicating the Coral Gardeners to teach kids in Fiji and Hawaii and Bahamas and Mexico how to restore their home coral reefs. He's a Rolex ambassador, and he has all the foundations knocking on his door to say, how can we help? 16 years old. Tremendous. So there's a lot of hope for the restoration of ecosystems like coral reefs and mangroves. But we also have to protect species, animals like whales and orcas and sharks, because just now we're beginning to understand the role that wildlife plays in the carbon cycle. Just by the movement of animals, they're moving plankton and nutrients from the depths of the ocean to the surface. And even animals that are less than popular, like sharks, you know, these are scavengers, but they're the garbage eaters of the ocean, and they clean it up, and they are critically important to the health of a living ocean that we need for our own survival. But every year, humans kill 100 million sharks, at least. And not just for the fin trade, you know, they eat them and they get caught. This animal is one of my favorite creatures in the whole ocean. It's called the oceanic white-tipped shark. It has pectoral fins like an airplane. And it's known as the shipwreck shark because it's scavenger, you know, and it's pelagic. It has to investigate anything that's floating. So whenever there's a shipwreck, he and his friends are the first ones in the sea. And they're very curious, they're aggressively curious. So you see the first one come, and it's mesmerizing. You know, you see this torpedo coming at you. And then you look behind you and there's another one. And before you know, you're surrounded, 7 or 8. And all it takes is one of them to be brave enough to give you a nip and it's over. This used to be the most abundant predator on land or water that's ever lived on our planet. Today there's less than 10% left because they get caught in long lines that are used to catch tuna. So when you have your next sushi or your next wachichi or whatever, think about the cost to nature for the delicacies that we eat. The ocean also has a lot of ecosystems that absorb a lot of carbon, like seagrass beds and mangroves. And for the first time in the history of humanity, we are able to start taking account of what these ecosystems are, put them in the blockchain, and use the coordinating tools that Web3 gives us to issue carbon credits against the protection of ecosystems like this. There's a lot of hope in that. And when you go to the beach and you get tumbled by a wave and you swallow a bunch of water, you're not just swallowing water, you're swallowing millions of microorganisms, little animals and plants known as the plankton. And it's the plankton that absorbs all that carbon. It's doing its photosynthesis just like any plant would. But it's absorbing almost half of the carbon dioxide on our planet. And today, we have lost the equivalent of 4 Amazon rainforests of plankton because of acidification. So this is where animals like whales come in. Think about a humpback whale, like this one I photographed in Antarctica. This animal is capable of diving 4 kilometers into the depths, pitch black in the cold water down there, to feed on krill or squid or herring. How does it find the food, in the dark? And they do this all day long. So it goes down, scoops a whole bunch of nutrient-rich food in the bottom of the ocean and brings it up to the surface. And it's happened to me more than once, when I'm swimming with whales and I get a plume of shit. And whale poop is so rich in minerals, it's fertilizers for the plankton. I talked to a whale scientist recently and he said to me, we almost exterminated whales. We almost killed them all. If we want to survive on planet Earth, we need about 10x the number of whales that we have today to continue doing the gardening service. But I'm working with scientists that are already thinking about how do we issue carbon credits for the protection of whales. So if you're a cargo company, a shipping company that's constantly traveling where the whales are feeding, if you're willing to move your ship to avoid the areas where there's whales, you get a carbon credit. Get paid with crypto. And the ocean, just like land, it's experiencing enormous heat waves. This was a shot in front of my house in Vancouver Island. We have the very famous group of orcas known as the J-pod, the southern resident whales. And whenever there's a heat wave in the ocean, the water can be 5 to 7 degrees warmer than it's supposed to be. And that kind of water is deadly for animals like whales and orcas. I know where I'm going. I want to tell you a really hopeful story of the role that photographers can play, because we're not just taking pictures, we're not just telling stories. By virtue of being photographers, we have a lot of access. I use my access to talk to ministers and the president, and I don't know what it is, people want to talk to me, but it's great. It's great. So, just before COVID hit, my husband and I bought a boat. The most expensive thing about what we do in our work is pay for the boat. It's on average about $5,000 a day. And you can get a captain that's a real jerk, that refuses to stay or take you where you need to go. So Paul was like, we're going to buy our own boat and we're going to spend the time that is needed to tell the stories. It's a very difficult thing. You can spend hours and hours shooting whatever it is, a wedding, or underwater you get 1 hour because that's how long your tank lasts. You have to come back up. So it's expensive and it's very inefficient. So we bought this boat and then COVID hit. And we were in Canada, and like everybody else, we're stuck at home. And Paul started thinking, how do we make it to the boat? So we bought a camper. And we drove across Canada, and we drove down to the United States in Idaho, and we drove all the way to Maryland. And there it is, the Sea Legacy 1. It's an aluminum catamaran, 62 feet long. And it's very bare bones, there's no luxurious item on this boat. But we put in a compressor, and we put orange sails on it, and we made it beautiful, except we didn't know how to sail. So during COVID, we cut the ropes and we left to learn how to be at sea on this boat. And we started working with Sony. And the thing that I'm going to show you now is what happened before we left. We had just been in the Bahamas. We were photographing the sharks because sharks in the Bahamas are protected, and they generate $120 million a year from divers that come and dive with the sharks. And so we were trying to make a case for why protection is so important. And then Dorian hit, and so we were called back to the Bahamas.
It's been 5.5 weeks since Hurricane Dorian devastated the Bahamas.
The Category 5 hurricane churning for hours.
The complexities of the storm and the recovery are in some ways just beginning to reveal themselves.
We had been pounding on us for 18 hours. Then we had 2 days of solid rain non-stop.
People need to be on the ground to read what's going on.
It's bad.
This level of destruction is caused by catastrophe called climate change that we all bear responsibility for.
It's like somebody took the reef and turned it upside down.
I don't know how we're going to clean that up.
The people here, they just look at the long road ahead of having to rebuild, and they want to share their story with the world.
This is the way I live before the hurricane.
Still a lot of work to do, you know.
It might take a while to come back.
We cannot forget the people of the Bahamas. So we went back to the Bahamas on the Sea Legacy 1, and I have to be quite honest with you, I was feeling pretty desperate. You know, I was like, how do you make it right for these people? You know, what can you tell them? They endured Dorian, and they lost every building in 3 islands, and then COVID hit. And when we got to the Bahamas, we were the only people in every marina that we visited. You know, there was just absolutely no income. Over 90% of the income of the Bahamas comes from tourism. So the Prime Minister had approved a lease for an exploration ship to come from the UK to start looking for oil in the Bahamas. And that's what we were doing, you know, just like, let's try to make the case for, you know, it's gonna come back and people are gonna return, and like, what do you tell people? Anyway, we're there, we're diving, and we're not seeing anybody for weeks and weeks, and we were working with these animals, tiger sharks. They're so awesome. And we had these animals all to ourselves. You know, you go to Tiger Beach and there's tens of these sharks all over the place. And we're doing 10 dives a day and diving at night and just photographing. And then one day, a little boat, you know, crosses the Gulf Stream from Florida, and it comes and it drops its hook right next to us. And it's an American scientist, Dr. Austin Gallagher. And he comes on board to have a beer with us, and he starts telling me this story. He's a shark scientist, and he's been studying tiger sharks for a long time. And he says, you know, Cristina, I put some action cameras on the fins of these sharks, and when I looked at the footage, I could see that these sharks are swimming over hundreds of thousands of kilometers of seagrass. And so we started asking questions, you know, how big is the seagrass bed? And then talking to scientists that work in climate change, you know, this bed so big, how much carbon could it be sequestering every year? And Austin didn't know what to do with this, you know, he was thinking that he could personally make money from it, which was funny. And I said, no, you know, let me introduce you to the senior advisor to the Prime Minister, because Paul and I have been working on doing a theater in Nassau for the cruise ship companies that come in with all the tourists. You know, we wanted to show them the wonders. And so we have this great relationship with the bank, and I took Austin in and we told them, we said, you know what, you have 92,000 square kilometers of seagrass capable of sequestering 3% of global emissions. If you protect that seagrass and issue carbon credits against that protection, and if you put those protections on the blockchain so that there's a clear, public, transparent ledger that everybody can verify that the carbon is still there, you can make a lot of money. And so they did. So today, the Bahamas, I think this week, the scientific paper is going to be published. And we did something that I thought was pretty extraordinary, you know? When there's money on the table, everybody gets greedy, and everybody starts thinking, how can they get a chunk? So they made me an advisor to this, and I said, you know what, the thing to do would be to create a sovereign fund that sits outside of government for posterity, so that the next administration cannot become corrupt and want a piece of it. And let's create a smart contract that mandates that the money that comes from these carbon credits is reinvested in more ocean conservation and in the training of Bahamians to be the scientists that monitor that the carbon is still there next year. And so all of that is happening. The Bahamas is going to be rebuilt on the protection of their blue carbon assets. And then they did one more thing. They created a carbon exchange because the Bahamas has been dealing and playing with crypto for a long time. Any country that has carbon assets, including Turks and Caicos, Cayman Islands, Panama, they're bringing their carbon assets to the Bahamas exchange already. So countries are greatly incentivized to start protecting their ocean assets to receive compensation. You know, to me, it's almost miraculous. So, I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot, but truly, for the first time in the history of humanity, we have the coordinating tools of Web3 to start adding value back to nature. Because that 1930s economic theory that we've been living under, neoliberal theory, does not include nature in the economic equation at all. But for the first time now, we can start incorporating nature back, and we can give it the value that it deserves. I am going to close. Where is Michaela? Aha, may I show? So Sony has been amazing to Sea Legacy and to Paul and to me. And they've been supporting our personal storytelling, but also Sea Legacy. And last year, we started doing a series for Sony's YouTube channel called Sea Legacy, The Voyage. So if you want to see it, you can see from episode 1 when we didn't know how to sail all the way to now. And say next Wednesday? Next Wednesday, we're launching season 2. And so that's what I'm going to show you. Please don't record it because it's embargoed until next week. But I hope you'll share it. I hope you'll enjoy it.
We're back here now in Mexico. I'm ashamed to say that I've been with you for 12 years, and I know about 6 words in Spanish.
Now you want me to teach you Spanish, really?
What's a really good verb?
Okay, Mexicans, we have a lot of slang, so important to know órale.
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 Just means let's go.
Órale.
Órale, yeah.
Bienvenido a Sea Legacy 1.
You're doing it, that's really good.
Órale.
After months of preparation, planning, building relationships, raising funds, moving the boat, we're finally here.
The Sea Legacy team has arrived in La Paz, ready to get to work on the next chapter of this journey.
Okay, go guys,
It is so exciting. You start feeling this tingling of excitement. You just fit back into crew life, your mates are here, everybody's excited. There's a new adventure awaiting.
It's a place that Cristina has talked about since the day I met her. It's worked its way into her soul and her heart.
I am here to partner with the local fishermen, local NGOs to protect this beautiful place once and for all. Jacques Cousteau called this place the Aquarium of the Sea. For 35 years, I've been wanting to come back to see it as an explorer.
It's one of the richest marine habitats in the world. It has hundreds of thousands of rays. It is such a rich place.
It has the most species of whales of any body of water on the planet. 9 different species of whales. And they're all here.
It is such a rich place, but it is also heavily fished by the commercial fishing industry.
They exploit the resources of the Gulf of California more like a mining resource instead of a living thing.
She's absolutely in love with this place, and she's going to do whatever she can to help fight for it and protect it.
I guess the good part about coming back to Mexico is that everybody wants our help. So it's overwhelming already, and Jess, you've done an incredible job of bringing this boat from the Galapagos. Paul and I have talked about promoting you to field producer.
Pay goes down, responsibilities triple. So good luck, thank you.
We already knew back in the 1980s that this place needed help. I had already heard stories about this mythical man, Mario Gomez, He was the man behind this idea of creating a biosphere reserve. He knew that Sea Legacy could play a critical role in helping his organization, Beta Diversidad, push this idea across the finish line.
And you, heart to heart.
Good to have you on board.
Beta Diversidad is an NGO based in Mexico working with Baja California South. This is a very important region, and people around the world and around Mexico do not know the values of this area. This marine corridor is being used by mantas, sharks, turtles, whales, etc. 65% of the Mexican fisheries are here. We have a big threat from the states neighboring Baja California South because they have already depleted or destroyed their fishing grounds.
He wants to create a biosphere reserve that essentially is a swath of ocean all around Baja Peninsula that is fully protected. It's one of the most ambitious conservation initiatives I've ever seen.
That's this whole swath that we're trying to connect all that.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
We're trying to convince the government and the locals that this is important to be preserved. In order to get a designation, we need to be really strategic. We need key players, experts. Sea Legacy is an expert in doing communication, experts in conservation to show the Mexicans and the world that this is a place with a lot of value. You're gonna have to touch the hearts and the feelings of everyone.
If we can protect the southern Gulf of California, to create a biosphere reserve so that tourism and small fisheries can thrive, I think that's a really good thing.
If we're going to get the world to fall in love with Baja, then we're going to have to go after the most charismatic animals. Think about 10,000 mobile rays in a swirling tornado vortex. First time ever getting in the water with bobolas. I can't wait to see it.
They're right here, I see them. They're everywhere, right? Without being preachy to a new audience, it's an invitation to adventure. It's lowering the price of entry into what I think is the most important conversation of our life. So, that's my most famous photo. It's one of the first ones I took. I still didn't know what I was doing, but I love it. The lady with the goose. And I use it to talk about, in the 30 years that I've been doing this, the lesson that I've learned is that we all kind of assume that somebody else is going to take care of this problem. Governments, corporations, somebody surely is doing something. And I'm here to tell you, nobody's coming to help us. It's going to really take each and every one of us doing everything we can to speak up, to use our voices, our talent, the storytellers, our influence in our personal and work lives, to speak up, to do something about climate change and the loss of biodiversity on our planet. So, now that I am Canadian and I live in Canada, I came up with an acronym, SELFIE, because we're photographers, right? And it stands for someone else is likely fixing it, eh? Nobody else is. It really is incumbent upon all of us to do everything we can. And I want to thank you again for coming to spend this afternoon with me. And am I taking questions?
Sure. Would you like to take questions?
Yeah, because I have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I love my job. I have my ikigai. Questions, please. Yes. Oh, we have microphones. I'm sorry. Let me give you this. I don't want to lose it.
I'm Bruce Byers. I've been documenting medical missions for the last 20 years. And one of my most difficult things is that when I do a medical mission, I really want to do it, just like you really want to do this. My biggest problem is convincing the people that I produce the photographs how important the photographs are to raise funds to go do more medical missions. So they don't populate their website with the photographs of exactly what they're doing. And it's the biggest trouble with it. And it's not the big organizations, the small guys that could really do a tremendous amount of good. So that's kind of what I was asking you. I'm sure you run into people that, hey, do this, and we can help, but how do you get them to do do that?
Oh my God, it's the bane of our existence. So communications is not really recognized as something that should be funded. It's seen as raising awareness as a black hole of money, right? And so the big foundations that fund medical help or any of this stuff, are not set up for that. So I've made it my life mission to try to explain why communications is so important. And I don't remember who I was talking to earlier, but when it comes to the extractive industries and to the people that have a vested interest in continuing the destruction of our planet, they have enormous budgets to make the case for why they should continue to extract. So I try to make the case to the foundations for, what kind of funding do we have to communicate the opposite point of view. And we are having some success, but I was going to show this slide and you told me not to. So in the United States, and we are the most charitable, the most philanthropic country on the planet, collectively we donate to charity $480 billion a year, which is amazing. But 32% of that goes to religious causes. And then it goes to health and education and art, and 1.8% goes to the environment. And the environment includes all of biodiversity, all of the ocean, all of climate change, all of wildlife, plus dogs, cats, and horses. So, if we really want to win at solving these issues, we need to flip that pyramid on its head, and we need to make sure that our donations are going to protecting life on Earth. And then we'll deal with all the other issues. But yeah, convincing people to spend money on communications, and that's why I'm so grateful to Sony, because they have never questioned my mission, They just asked me, how else can we help? Thank you.
Any other questions?
That's it. Yes.
Hi, so I'm in college right now, I'm studying conservation biology, and I want to do exactly what you guys do, but there's such a big step between going from, I don't know, even with wedding photography, there's some steady-ish stream of income, but with, wildlife photography, it's just if you don't really get published, it's not really financially viable. And I was wondering if you had how you got into it, and if you had any big advice on how to do it.
Oh, I feel your pain. I remember it as if it was yesterday. I know it's a huge leap, you're studying the science so that you can articulate the ideas that are necessary, and then you want to have the tools to communicate those ideas as well. And the whole thing is really powerful, but it is a very long journey. So my advice would be to collaborate, Find organizations that you can volunteer with, that you can start learning the ropes of where you need to go and how you do this in the field, and then partner with other people that do other skills. Like when we go on Sea Legacy 1, I do none of the filmmaking, I do none of the drone piloting, because I am in charge of underwater photography alone. So find other people that can collaborate with you and pool resources, and just know that you cannot go at it alone, and you need to become part of a larger team. You can be like Tituan and create your own team, or you can join an existing team. Volunteering with the Coral Gardeners would be a great way to get started. Yeah, it's a long journey, that's why you need to find that ikigai, because otherwise you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? Yes?
Just a follow-up question to that. So during COVID, I lived in Hawaii, this is very much part of the conversation there, and there's a lot of people there who are retired and want to help, and a lot of them are photographers and underwater photographers, and I've found that there's not a lot of organizations are I've heard a lot of people express that they want to do something and they don't know how, and so I was just curious if, building on your question, if there are examples that you've seen in addition to what you guys have done of different models around the world of photographers perhaps working together, or videographers or so forth, to help.
Yeah, so Sea Legacy is only 8.5 years old, and we've done so much already, but we're a very young organization. So for the first time in our history, we have the capacity now to start bringing in new storytellers. And so starting in January, we're going to start inducting a new storyteller every month. we're starting with the best, David Duboulet, he's like the father of underwater photography. But the idea is that these are people that are invested in the mission enough that they're willing to go and raise funds as well and use the non-profit so that they can do the projects that they're interested in. And at the same time, Andy had this idea. He said, why don't we build the World Ocean Library, a place where we all can contribute our properly metadata imagery so that other organizations can push the agenda, because it's so hard to raise money for it. And so we're looking for ways to partner with somebody to start building a free resource for the conservation community that can feed from this work. Now, Kauai, we work, Rebecca and Adam Newman have a home, and they've phoned us a couple of times. They want to help, so if resources are needed, there's a lot of people with money in Kauai. Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Who wants to come and save the world with me? Come on, questions.
We all do.
Yeah. Yes. Right here. Oh, no? Oh, come on.
We want to save the world with you. Who wants to save the world with Cristina?
Right. We're not going with you alone.
Amazing, Cristina. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thank you guys so much for being here, for supporting us, for coming and enjoying Creative Space. We really appreciate it. I hope your mind was blown by this, just mine as well as my mind was. We still have half an hour of Creative Space, so enjoy the rest of it. Thank you, and continue to support us on Sony Alpha. We're on social, Alpha Universe, on YouTube. We have all sorts of great content just like what you saw, and we will continue to support this community. So we appreciate you being here. Thank you.